The TEFL Commute, Season 3, Episode 3, Behind Closed Doors, in which Sean and I explore what goes on in classrooms.
You're listening to the TEFL Commute podcast.
Hey Sean, how's it going?
Hey Lindsay, let me just shut my door so I'm behind a closed door.
Yes, I'm well behind closed doors.
Yeah,
behind closed doors and closed windows. It's a bit chilly here.
I'd say, are you listening to Cyril? It's a bit off track, but you're listening to Cyril thinking of closed doors, where she's recording in her wardrobe at the moment.
I was thinking about that. For those listeners who don't know what the hell we just said, Serial is another podcast, very famous podcast, where actually the woman reporter is now she's reporting on a case from her hotel room, and she goes in the closet because it makes a good sound quality. I'm wondering about that. I'm looking at the closet in my office and thinking maybe I should get in there and try to record.
Yeah, that's like James would be happy if we did that, I think. But anyway, but that's really taking it behind closed doors seriously. So I guess today's episode is going to be about teaching, but not about. We always say this is a podcast about teaching, but where teaching might come up. But actually, teaching will come up today, I would have thought.
Yes, I think we are. We've chosen today's topic is entirely about teaching, but the whole sort of thing of teaching as the class is the teacher's kingdom, and what goes on in my class is my business and not anyone else's business. So in that way, sort of, I think you said once, teaching is a kind of isolated profession in that way.
Yeah, isolated, and also from if we talk about it being a customer service profession, it's a very secretive profession as well. You know, if you talk about, I'm from a private language school background, so the customers are all the students are all paying. Yet they pay for something that goes on in this very secretive place behind these doors where
exactly it is quite once you go in and close the door and begin your class, it's not like other jobs where people may see what's going on and stuff. So I suppose doctors, they're interacting more with each other. There might be a whole bunch of them in an operation room, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Doctors and nurses. What about other professions? Is there any other profession that's like teaching in that same respect?
Well, I was thinking it's not just the idea of the closed door. I was taking it a step further. The students have come into the room, the door's closed, and they're sat down. And for the next, however long the lesson is, they probably don't have an idea of what's going to happen. Whereas the teacher, the person at the front of the room, is sat there, with a lesson plan and kind of knows where they're going to go. And yes. I find it fascinating because obviously teacher training is what I do the most of now. And I find looking at this and talking about this really the fascinating part of it, and how much we don't actually share with anybody, whether it be the students or fellow teachers or whatever.
That's true. And so often, it is just the teacher beholden to the students behind the closed doors. So there are, of course, observations. That brings me to my first question. Sean, as a teacher trainer, you observe teachers quite a bit. My first question is, how do the teachers, and I do this as well, I can answer afterwards, but how do your teachers feel about being observed?
I think it depends on what type of observation they're doing. This is something that we talk about a lot on management courses where I tutor. It's whether it be on a course or whether it be part of kind of the school's in-service development.
There's two different things, aren't there?
And then there are lots of subcategories to that as well. I don't think it can just be
like a pre-service teaching course getting observed as a brand new teacher, or an in-service teaching course where you're getting observed as part of a course, or a sort of diploma or Delta level course.
And then this whole idea, and I think in many schools, often observations are kind of posited as development things, but quite clearly in most observations some form of judgment takes place. And I think once you have a judgment, and even the idea of judgment, obviously the person being observed is going to feel some angst.
Do you remember the first time you were observed?
Yeah, actually, funnily enough, I wasn't observed. I actually moved in my professional career. I moved to be observed because I started teaching, way back when, in an environment where I wasn't really properly qualified, and I worked in a school where observation was just something talked about rather than done. So I deliberately moved to put myself in an environment where I would be observed, and I remember it because it was kind of like the first observation I ever had, but it was also an entry. Observation for TEFL course, so what is now the Delta, but the TEFL course back then. And I remember the guy walking out the room saying, "Yes, there are some full boils I have of your teaching." And at the time, I didn't know what the word meant, and I'm like, "Oh, what is that, good or is it bad?" I remember it from there. But I was I've always welcomed observations, so.
I remember the first time I was observed was not a voluntary thing. It was it was an observation as part of an evaluation at the university I was working. And so there was judgment, but there was not really any talk about it. It was just sort of, once in the year, the director will come and observe your class. And then maybe talk to you about it, or maybe not, depending if she had time.
I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? It's kind of in a lot of those environments, it's done because it has to be done. I did the person doing the observing ticks the box and says I've done the observation, rather than actually seeing observation as a meaningful aspect. And then if there's no discussion, then it kind of builds up the observees. I'll say observee, I doubt it's the word, the observees angst, because they don't know what's happened or, what the outcome of that was. So it is.
Yeah. I think also, lots of teachers complain that when they get observed, lessons will often go terribly wrong. Maybe it's because they're nervous or different things. I had one teacher write me a letter when I was working a lot for One Stop English. There was letters that came in, and one person asked about how to avoid their class going very badly when they were getting observed. I came up with some ideas here. If you do get observed and feel that it's too judgmental and want to make it developmental, here are some suggestions that I have for this. You tell me if you've done this kind. I think some of these things you've touched on, Sean. So first, if there was an observation scheme at my school, one of the things is to try to take some of the control back. So going and asking the director, whoever's observing, say, "Hey, I know you're coming to observe me. One of the things I've been trying to work on is whatever, my teacher talk or my board work."
So kind of having a personal aim to the...
Yeah, you have a personal aim, because that also then shows that you're interested in your own development. They're not just coming in, so you're and it kind of brings some of the power back to you, So you say, "I know you're going to do what you're going to do, but can you please pay attention to that? Because I'm really trying to improve that."
But I think that's that's something that I would say to most teachers. They only... I don't mean to be negative, but that only really works if the person doing the observing is qualified enough to be able to make that judgment. And I think that's important because obviously as a teacher trainer, if you send me in the classroom, I can comment. I feel that I can comment quite objectively on your teaching. The same with you. But as a school director might actually be many years out of the classroom.
That's true.
And if they're tick boxing, and I think that's something. So I actually.
Add a caveat to that.
I think the advice is excellent, but...
Well, I think then there's another one that you can do, even with that is the case, is that in one school where I worked, observations were completely random. We had no choice. And that was really problematic, because sometimes the director might come in and it was a day where we were doing a writing class. And I was like, well, you're not going to see a lot of teaching, because they're going to be doing a lot of writing or a lot of group work or project work. So... if the observations are random, another school I worked at, which was really good, we knew we'd be observed twice during the year and on short notice. But the observer, in this case it was the senior teacher, would ask us that day, "Do you mind being observed?" And you were allowed to say no, and it would get repeated to another day. So you couldn't kind of prepare it a week in advance, because that ended up being problematic. The observer didn't want to see show lessons.
Well, I was going to say, it was interesting you saying the show lesson, because obviously you were talking about things going wrong in the lesson, and I was going to say a lot, and I think that can happen, but I think in a lot of lessons that I see or have seen, they are the show lessons. So in fact, they're actually pointless because they are, the lessons the teacher knows is going to go quite well. The students have been primed for the lesson.
That's true.
And with it, and I think to me, actually, as an observer, I'd prefer it when a lesson goes wrong. You see real teaching when the lesson goes wrong.
That's true.
And when I used to be head of recruitment for a school in Prague, it fell on the teacher trainers to do the demo observations. And I loved it when the demo lessons went wrong, and I knew more about hiring a teacher from them dealing with that situation where it's gone wrong than if it was on script per se. So
the other thing raises another question: is it possible to kind of come in and observe a lesson and get an idea of what real teaching is? Or do we get what I was researching? I found the name for it, the Hawthorne Effect. Have you heard of the Hawthorne Effect, Sean?
Only because of the research. But go on, tell everyone what it is.
Okay, well, the Hawthorne Effect is not named after a person. I thought it was named after Mr. Hawthorne.
Is it like the Stockholm Syndrome?
Yes, Hawthorne was a place called the Hawthorne Works. It was a Western electric factory outside of Chicago, and these experiments were done in 1924 to 1932.
Oh, you know what? It's the light, isn't it? Somebody was talking about this.
So they wanted to see if the workers would become more productive in higher or lower levels of light. So the productivity improved when these changes were made and slumped when the study ended. So why am I talking about this, about observation things? Is that the Hawthorne Effect sort of says that the effect of actually observing something will make the change. So they suggested that the productivity was not because they had raised or lowered the light. It was because the workers knew they were being observed.
Yeah, it was also, wasn't it to do with, is it to do with the feedback? They felt that the managers were actually taking an interest in them because they were asking about the light. And
exactly.
Okay, yeah.
So, and I think there's another thing, it's the effect hypothesis or something like that, something under observation will change because it's under observation. So you're not going to, you can't almost see if they know that the subjects will not behave normally if they know that they're being watched.
Yeah.
So,
but I was thinking. Sorry, you were giving advice, weren't you? Did we finish with that?
Yes, I think I did.
I was thinking back to students that are problematic, or you've been observed they're problematic. We had when you run a kind of the 4-week training courses like CELTA, and you get in we used to do it with guinea pig students, the students that volunteered and came in for free lessons pretty much to create the class. And we ran many courses back to back, and so these students used to turn up week in, week out. They were similar groups of students, and we knew we probably needed to change the students when the students at the end of a lesson would put their hand up and go, so to the trainee teacher. So what was the aim of that? It's kind of like
that's true. We had the same thing in Barcelona when I was doing teacher training in Barcelona. The guinea pig students, I love the name for that, eventually started figuring it out. After seeing so many kind of demo lessons and so many things, and they would say, excuse me, do you think it's time that you should be concept checking this with us now? And it was very funny, yeah.
I think we are obviously, both of us are from environments where observation is seen as the norm. There are many places, I guess, where the behind the closed doors is just the way that the teaching works. There isn't any observation.
No, not at all.
So, I mean, but I don't think that means that teachers can't observe. I think these days, with technology, you can actually do a lot of self-observation.
On the topic of technology, I had a very interesting short conversation with Philip Kerr, who has appeared on this as a guest on our podcast before. We spoke about another interesting development in technology and teacher observation.
Philip, thanks for joining us. You and I were talking a little bit before about something you discovered called visual classroom.
Visible classroom.
Visible classroom. Okay, and I was thinking this fits really nicely into some of the other things we were talking about on the podcast. Why don't you tell the listeners what visible classroom is?
Yeah, well, I will. I have to say first that I've not personally experimented with this. I mean, I've just been looking at the promotional videos and reading the bump behind it. But okay. It's a service which is being offered by a university in Australia combined with artificial intelligence media company, and it's based on the work of John Hattie. And I guess a lot of people will know about John Hattie because of his book, Visible Learning, which is this, sort of a synthesis of meta-analyses of all of the things that make teaching and learning effective or ineffective. And what this service, visibleclassroom.com, is offering is that teachers record their lessons. It's audio recording, and they send these recordings off to the service. The service then transcribes everything that takes place in the classroom, teachers talking and the students talking, and analyzes it using some fairly sophisticated artificial intelligence. And they get feedback, and the feedback is an attempt to tell them how effective their teaching is on the basis of this recording. So it's very objective, quantitative analysis of what takes place in the classroom.
And what kind of classes are they offering this to? Any classes? Is for tertiary, for primary, secondary, language classes?
No, it's very clearly for everybody, but I don't know how appropriate it would be for language teachers, because the sorts of things that they're interested in are the extent to which teachers are promoting critical thinking in their classrooms, the extent to which they scaffold the learning processes, the extent to which it's a positive classroom environment. But I think that the exchanges that take place in a language classroom are very different from what takes place in geography or science or history. But I think it would still be very interesting. So, yeah, I mean, the feedback is things like how fast was the teacher speaking? What proportion of teacher talking time is there to student talking time? And using the artificial intelligence, it's looking at things like the questions that the teacher asks. Are these deep questions or are they surface questions? And you get feedback telling you how you've performed as a teacher managing the class and suggesting the extent to which you are promoting effective teaching.
Do you think that this tool, we've been speaking on the podcast about the difference in observations and letting people behind the closed doors of the classroom, teachers letting people behind the closed doors of their classroom, difference between judgmental and developmental observation. A tool like Visible Classroom and a service and technology like Visible Classroom, do you think it would be used more in the service of developmental type observation or judgmental?
I think its real value would be in developmental observation, because there's simply no way that you could really draw any very firm conclusions from this kind of data. But I think it would be very interesting for teachers to explore this, if they can afford it, of course. And I think it would be really interesting for trainers too, because I'm not convinced as a trainer and as an observer on teacher training courses that my appreciation of a lesson is the same as another trainer's. I mean, sometimes we have the same opinion. Mm-hmm. So it'd be really quite nice to have this sort of data behind, this teacher talked for this proportion of time. So you can really back it up with some hard data. I don't know, it'd be interesting, but it costs quite a lot of money. It's £350 for 5 lessons.
Wow. Go. And do you think that these are teachers themselves buying it, or are they institutions that will be buying it to try to set up a program?
I think that's the problem, and there are going to be very few teachers who are going to be spending that amount of money. I mean, £70 a lesson, that's a huge amount of money. So it's going to be institutional buy-ins, and if the institution is buying it, of course they're going to be using it for evaluation more than development, whatever they claim.
That's very true. Well, we'll have to wait and see if anything like this catches on in language teaching, or if we see indeed any other initiatives of sort of recording teachers for developmental purpose come along down the pipeline in the future.
I'm sure we will. I'm sure there'll be more of this kind of thing. I think they'll have to develop a rather different pricing model, but I'm sure there'll be things of this kind. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Question for you, while we're on the topic of technology. Would you accept, if we agree that the Hawthorne Effect is real, so that the students and the teacher know they're being observed, so they won't behave completely normally, but now technology would allow you to observe without knowing that you're being observed, would you accept a webcam installed in your classroom that you wouldn't know if it was on or off, so that you could be watched at any time by the director? Would you think that that's a fair thing, good for your development, or like just too spooky?
I don't think the question. I think the question would be why would they be turned on and off? Is the person doing it to check up on me? I actually.
Well, presumably they would sell it to you as this will give us a real.
I have had trainee teachers come to me who have come from environments. I think it was somewhere in Japan, actually, the first time I heard of it, where the classroom did have cameras, but it was purely to check that the teacher was in the classroom doing a job rather than anything. That was a Big Brother thing. So
that would creep me out.
I think if it was a form of, if there was development in it, and there was something in it, then I wouldn't have a problem with that. But as I said, I don't have a problem.
I suppose you're right. If they said we're going to do this over a period of 1 month, where sometimes we'll record and sometimes we won't, and we get your consent and the student's consent, and we'll use those with you to help you develop your teaching, then fine. But if I was starting at a school and they're like, we have webcams in every single classroom that film you from multiple angles, you never know if they're on or off, and we just want to make sure that you're following a program.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, bye.
Yeah, no. So I think no. And also, I mean, you asked me about any kind of observation, and I'll say I'm fine. I've spent the last 15 years or so being observed as a teacher, so I'm completely comfortable with it. I find I learn from an observation, and I learn observing people, whether it be for a course or whether it be as a peer observation, something like that. So
let me put the shoe on the other foot then. So as a teacher, we would have ambivalent feelings about it depending how it's done. But what about the new thing that started happening in Spain and in the States big time is, would you want a webcam that you as a parent could check in on your little one at daycare or at primary school at any time?
Well, that's a different thing, isn't it? They're checking in on the kid rather than on the teacher. So that's not an observation.
No, it isn't an observation, but you are getting behind the closed doors.
Well, that's true. But then, I mean, again, I come from a background where we used to open the doors to the parents every so often anyway, so the parents could. The thing about that is often the parents' idea of, for want of a better word, communicative language teaching is not the same as the one that is put forward by the school. So, the teacher wants to get the students talking. The parent wants the kid to learn the word list. So we used to throw open the door so that the parents could see what teaching was. And I think that taking it to a webcam level,
that really does creep me out about these. I'm looking at. I've got a couple of websites open here of companies that specialize in online streaming from daycares.
It is creepy. Don't get me wrong, it is creepy.
Is it creepy just to us now? Like, within 20 years, will our children, or 30 years, would their children just think it's completely normal that their daycare completely is rigged with HD high definition streaming video, which is what I'm looking at right now.
We are moving, I think, more and more towards that anyway. Well, I'm not saying, I'm just saying that's a statement, not whether it's good or bad. I'm thinking about developments in teacher training per se. When we now do, something like a tablet has allowed video observation to take place a lot easier than it used to do, yeah? They're almost, as part of one of the courses that I run, our teachers observe themselves on an iPad, and so they take 10-minute snippets of the lesson, which you can never do before. Going back to what I said earlier in the podcast about technology allowing you to self-observe, you can, if you've got a problem with teacher talk, you can record yourself on your phone and play it back. So I think generally there, and I wouldn't, with a rise in online teacher training courses, I can't see it being too long before videos involve, the remote observation is done in that way. So
perhaps are we looking at the end of the behind closed doors syndrome? Is that going to be a very 20th century and prior thing of teaching? Eventually,
I was just thinking. Actually, I've said it in another podcast in January. I went to the British Educational and Technology Show, the big education thing. There are lots of companies now that they're actually working in the field of video observation. So building up portfolios of your students via grabbing video. An app, one of the best apps I saw actually was one as a teacher trainer. You know, when you're trying to make the notes when you're observing a lesson, there's an app that's been developed which will allow you to have tags. So as you're watching, you can tag, and it will tag the point of the video where you can say like "good teacher talk" or "good instructions." So I actually think yes, I think that the video observation is going to be the norm, whether it is remote.
There's video observation, and then there's this remote sort of.
Yeah, well, I think I think once the video observation is the norm, then remote streaming is just the next part of that, isn't it?
Yeah. So then, presumably, can you see a future? Do you think that there would be a future where a concerned parent, can just, through any time of the daycare, primary, elementary, secondary school, can just like click on their mobile phone and just see what their teacher is doing and what the kid's doing? Will that is that transparency going to be good for accountability, or is it just going to create like a Big Brother?
I think there's lots of things in there. I think it's a Big Brother. But whether it happen or not is a different thing. I think yes, it will happen. Whether it should happen,
well, we'll have to wait and see. I think, of course, if any of you listening here have your own views on being observed by your director or by other teachers, or as part of training, as part of development, as part of accountability, or whether or not you are constantly being viewed on a webcam by parents or other stakeholders, feel free to let us know on our Facebook page or on our website, www.teflcommute.com.
I've got one more idea of behind closed doors before we shut up.
Of course.
So
I have one more as well.
And I'm just thinking that there is another behind closed doors in a sense, and that's behind the staff room door. And what goes on in the staff room, and the reason I bring that up is because whereas it's not necessarily as isolated as being a singular person in the classroom. I think it's very interesting what goes on behind that closed door of the staff room in terms of how we talk about students, how students get labelled, how things get done. And I think that's something that's an interesting area to think about. That that if you walk into a classroom and start into the staff room and vent or something, and how that might come across. And I
wonder if not more teachers might not be more concerned about that closed door being sacrosanct rather than the classroom
one. Yeah.
So maybe the classroom is one area, but the staff room is another area where there might be more resistance even after a while to having that door thrown open, because that's an area where a lot of venting goes on and lots of things get said that are quote unquote off the record, I suppose.
Yeah.
An interesting possibility. Hey, speaking of observations, I'll tell you one of the most impressive observations I ever saw was at a conference in 2011 in Barcelona called the Unplugged Conference. It was a conference that I helped organize with the TEFL teacher development's sake. Anyone who was at that conference, there weren't many of you, will remember it as being a very special occasion where we observed a dogme class taught by none other than Scott Thornbury and Luke Meddings.
Maybe you want to tell people what dogme is before you go on?
Yes. Dogme is a teaching method which advocates focusing more on emergent language, relying less on materials, and having the lesson driven by conversation.
Yeah, we'll put some links to it on the show notes.
And it was created by Scott Thornbury and Luke Meddings, who went and gave a demo lesson to 14 students, but in a big room, like a kind of theater gymnasium room, where that class was observed by 55 teachers.
Right.
So
actually,
very interesting.
This is another thing that seems to be coming along now. That these ideas of teachers teaching, rather than at conferences or as part of events, not just doing a session, but actually doing some teaching. I
did one of those at the ELT Jam conference, where teaching was part of it as well. Again, in Barcelona, yeah. I think that would be a great idea for conferences to see more teaching. At TEFL Poland conference, they used to have a slot where you could go along for a language lesson, like a Polish lesson, an Arabic lesson, just to remember what it was like to be a student.
Classroom. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that was teachers throwing open their classroom doors to then teach other teacher stuff. Unfortunately, there was not a lot of discussion afterwards. But I think putting teaching into conferences where you can actually observe a lesson or observe an author teaching according to whatever their method or their book is would be something very welcome.
You just actually, that just triggered something else in my mind. You said Scott and Luke taught the lesson, so it actually gives me the idea of team teaching.
Yes. Have you ever team taught?
Yes, I did actually, and I found it. I team taught with a guy called Sean, which was great. So the
Sean and Sean.
So the students didn't have any name problems. I did it. I've only done it once, but I did it at a summer school program where the students come to the UK to study for several weeks, and we both had similar level students, and we just thought it would be more productive if we talked together and did an elemental lesson. And I found it really, really rewarding. It was great to just be able to bounce stuff off people and whatever. And I actually like doing as a teacher developer and conference sessions. I love joint sessions for that reason. I just think there's a better dynamic when there's more than one person involved in it. And it's great seeing them work. So you're kind of observing as you teach.
Exactly. So, I've done the same thing. I team teach with a colleague of mine called Julia here in the south of Spain. We do. We always do the first couple of lessons together of a course, and then we split and kind of share a course. But and joint conference presentations are also great.
I think we should hear some Facebook philosophy.
No matter how many years we have been teaching, we should feel a little bit like a rookie every year by trying something new and not being afraid to fail. Heidi Power.
With that, maybe we should come to an end of our behind closed doors session, because we've kind of exited the doors now. We're completely in other.
Yeah, we've moved. I think that's because neither of us like our doors closed too long, really. So,
no.
But great. Hey, that was a good one. I enjoyed talking about observation. I think we should put the sort of caveat in there. We've talked to this at a very superficial level, and there's obviously a lot more. To talk about with observation and how observation might be done, and obviously our experiences are different to many other people's. So,
well, maybe this is an area that we could maybe revisit.
Yeah, we'll come back to it another time.
Anyway, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Hope your commute has been a good one.
Yeah, bye, and be careful of that door.
As your commute is coming to an end, let's look at how to do the self-observation we mentioned in the podcast. If there is no one to observe you, then self-observation provides a way of helping you reflect on your teaching practice. One way to self-observe is to record yourself, something made easy if you have a mobile phone. You can use this to record either audio or video. To record audio, simply switch on a recorder at a section of the lesson you want to listen to. Video is a little trickier, as you'll need to be able to put your phone in a position to get a good view of what you wish to record. We find standing it on a desk pointing towards the board is one way to record yourself. Both ways of recording will help make you aware of things you do in the classroom you don't usually see. For example, when Sean first recorded himself, he realised how much he talked unnecessarily. Once you have your clip, play it back and focus on one aspect. If you're focusing on teacher talk, then consider aspects such as how much you talk, is what you say useful for the students, do you give clear instructions? If you videoed yourself, then you consider things such as your position in the class, how you might come to the students, and which you spend most time talking to. We'll put other advice for self-observation on our website, TEFLcommute.com. You've been listening to the TEFL Commute, an original podcast produced and presented by Lindsay Clanfield, Sean Wilden and James Taylor. Don't miss out on any episodes by subscribing to us on iTunes and by visiting us at TEFLcommute.com.